Hello, everyone. I can't hear you yet. Hello, and I am just waiting for my sound to kick in. Okay, and of course, the sound isn't working. Ah, okay, just a second, everyone. And I'm still waiting for the sound. Okay, of course, it's not going to work. Ah, okay, give me 1 second because for some reason the sound is not working. Okay. I know we can't hear you because for some reason my sound is not working. Aha, finally, is my sound working? Okay, for some reason it is not working. Let's try something else. Ah, shucks. Okay, 1 second. I know. I know the sound isn't working. I just can't, for some reason, figure out how to get it to work. Oh, isn't this fun? Aren't you guys excited? The bad thing is that it's just one way. I think that's what has me going a little crazy. Anyway, what a wonderful Thursday. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Gail Boyd, for inviting me onto Alternative Venues for Jazz. Hello, hello, Gail. Excuse me. Hello. And that's why I was talking. Hey, everybody, I'm back. Okay, so this is exactly how jazz works, right? We have to improv sometimes, and sometimes it's just a heck of a lot of fun. So, again, welcome. Thanks, Gail. I really appreciate you inviting me. And my name is Karen Kennedy. I am the founder and owner of 24/7 Artist Development. And we're going to talk about a few things today. And I'd just like to start a little bit by asking you guys, how are you? You see how I am. A little, I don't know, typically hot day in Southern California, so it's a little frazzled, but things are good. So I do want you to know that please be sure and ask questions throughout the entire session, and I will address them at the end. I'm going to try to talk just a few minutes, a little bit about myself and a little bit about what I'm doing and sort of what's coming down the pike, and we'll go from there. Sound like a plan? Good. So here's something I've been thinking about. I think we have a theme that guides us, and life is about discovering that theme and allowing it to take us on a path forward. And my theme has always been about listening, connecting, and problem solving. It's been that way whether I've been an advocate for artists, whether I've been working in community development, or whether I've been working in education. It's those three things that have sort of steered me all along the way and brought me great fortune in a lot of non-monetary ways. So, how did I get started here? I have a BA in psychology. My master's is in counseling, and I had just passed my doctoral exams for my PhD in higher ed when I got a call to meet with some executives at A&M Records. This is in LA, and I had spent a few years as a dean and career planning person, counseling college students, designing internship programs at a couple of colleges here in LA. Now, I listen to a lot of music. I like a bunch of stuff, and my dad loved jazz. He loved it so much that it was the only music he ever bought. and he would make my brothers and sister and I sit down in front of the stereo every month when he got his new album, and we listen to music and we listen to jazz. Now that was when I was 4. Clearly, it stuck with me. So A&M was an artist-centric sort of boutique label that was started by trumpeter Herb Alpert and his best friend from high school, Jerry Moss. They were committed to social change. Now, in the mid 1980s, which is when I started there, the music industry was making lots of money, hand over fist, because everyone was buying albums and cassettes and eventually CDs, but not quite there at that point. There was no social media, there was no cable TV. I think we only had desktop computers. So music was one of the top 3 major forms of entertainment. It was a huge business. There were over 13 major labels and tons of indies. And Black people bought a lot of music. In fact, they accounted for over 50% of every dollar spent. But there was a little bit of a problem. Actually, there were 2 problems. Problem one, the music industry was segregated in almost every imaginable way: how artists were signed, how the product was distributed, how it was sold, how it was promoted, how it was marketed. It was all according to race. For instance, we had Black music department, we had pop music department, we had R&B music, we had alternative music, we had hip hop, we had dance, we had gospel, and we had Christian slash spiritual music. So there was this dichotomy here. The other thing that was you need to know is that, particularly at that time, Black executives could only work in the Black music departments, and whites basically were relegated to the pop music departments. So if you were a Black person wanted to work in alternative because you love Fish, that was going to be a hard gig to get. It really wasn't a job for you. The other thing to understand is that all that money that Black dollars were generating, where did that go? Take a guess. The Black consumer funded the white artists at a disproportionate amount. But Black music was expected to spend less and to meet the same goals. So then there was another problem. The NAACP understood how to read graphs, understood charts, and they threatened the entire industry with a massive national boycott unless there was some kind of systemic change. Now, A&M Records was an independent label. They could do whatever they want. They were fully owned by Herb and Jerry, and they wanted to do the right thing. And they wanted to keep making money. Now, only they could get Black kids to keep buying records and simultaneously make a difference in how people were trained to work in the music industry. That might work. Ring, ring, my phone. My phone call comes in. So, with the help of a wonderful exec at A&M Records, a guy by the name of Garber, he worked in promotions, and he sort of came up with this idea. We created a program called Yes to Jobs, which was paid summer internships for high school students of color. We created a pipeline for jobs behind the scenes in entertainment, whether it was in finance, accounting, um, business affairs, marketing, radio, you name it, in retail. It was a way to train young people of color to take jobs in the industry so that one couldn't say, well, sure, we'd like to give a job to somebody Black or somebody Hispanic, but we don't know anyone. Well, now you do. So we had this model, which has kept with me this to this day. It's called "You Can't Be What You Don't Know Exists," and that has really stuck with me throughout my entire career. If you don't know what's out there, you can't attain it. So that goes back to the idea of preparing yourself. So Yes to Jobs is great. We launched careers of engineers, TV producers. There's some really fantastic people who are working in entertainment today who got their start that way. So after a few successful years of doing that, I hired someone else, a wonderful woman, to replace me, and I segued into marketing at A&M. Working in R&B, I worked with Barry White and Brenda Russell and Randy Jackson. Yep, that guy, the Jackson that you don't remember, him. Um, Worked in hip hop, worked in pop, worked in gospel, Shirley Caesar, some other great, Al Green at the time. Um, and then I worked in jazz, and I worked with Sergio Mendes and Jerry Mulligan and Art Blakey and Stan Getz. I was essentially given all the projects that no one else wanted to do and that were considered low priority. But what I ended up doing was learning how to promote from within, how to create a fan base, and how to get creative. And it really prepared me for where I am now. And by the way, we were the first department to have the number one hit in of the year for A&M. So I think there was sort of says how one is incentivized. So after I left A&M Records, I was hired by Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, two great producers known for their hits with Janet Jackson and a bunch of other folks. Um, they came to me and asked me to head up their brand new label that they were starting, Perspective Records, which I said, sure, why not? Um, it was a great challenge because we had artists who no one had ever heard of. They all lived in Minneapolis or St. Paul. They had very little money, and I had a staff of two, me being one of the two. So it was a way of having to learn everything fast, having to figure out what the priorities were, figure out what had to be done, what I could farm out. And again, that prepared me later on for management because I under had to oversee all the budgets, had to do production, had to do release schedules and tour management and booking and artist relations, all of the things that go into running a record label and working with artists. One of the our first releases, another challenge, one of our first releases was a 40 member gospel group. And at the time, gospel wasn't played on secular radio. It was really relegated to gospel radio or Christian radio. So our challenge was we want this to be a secular band and we wanted to have success in the secular world. And we did it. It was called Sounds of Blackness. I got them on tour, 40 people on tour. I learned how to how to live in a two buses, two tour buses. Um, and we had some great hits, and we got a Grammy record, which is fabulous. Our second group that we released was six guys who played instruments, and the drummer was the singer. He led the band. It was called Mint Condition. Another great success, and another learning curve for me because it was how do you help people to understand that great musicians are what you hear first, and you can get it played on R&B radio, even if it's instrumental with some great, with the great lead voice, but the focus was on the instruments. They were all fabulous musicians and still are. So after that, I got fired. We had number one hit, we had a Grammy, I got fired. And I was replaced by a man who used to ask me for a job at the record label. He was BFFs with the owners, dopey me. However, smart me was in keeping in touch with the students that I hired at the Yes to Jobs program at A&M. One of them came to me during that time in which I was looking for a job on unemployment, trying to figure out what I was going to do. And this one guy I'd hired when he was 16 to work in sales at A&M came to me and said, look, I got an offer to work with this really great jazz musician, and I think I may also have an offer to work at a record label. I mean, to get a record deal. And I need some advice. I need some help. So I said, sure, let's talk about it. I'm going to see what I can do. His name was Eric Reed, and he became my first client in my management firm. My second client was Kenny Barron, whom I had met when I toured with Stan Getz when I was working at A&M Records, way before I even thought about becoming a manager. But this is just to show you this link of, I think, how important it is to be open to different opportunities. So I was working as a manager with two clients, and then I got a call from a guy who's considered a giant in the music industry. He was starting up a label, and he needed some help in marketing. So I went to work for MCA Silas Records with the understanding that I would continue to manage my two jazz musicians, which I did. While I was at Silas, I worked with Aaron Hall, I worked with Shantae Moore, um, Jesse Powell, a few other folks, but I left after a couple of years because I realized what I really, really loved was managing, and specifically managing jazz musicians. So I saved some money. I got what was then called a Rolodex, which would now be called a database. I got that in order, and I moved to New York. And that was in 1996, no, 1997. And since then, I've worked with Javon Jackson and Stefan Harris and Jackie Terrison and Gretchen Parlato and Camilla Mesa and James Francis and David Sanchez and Kenny Barron. So my message there is I think obstacles are like opportunities. One thing I've had to learn is that I have to be open to learning. And then I have to be prepared to make that learning experience a reality and something that relates to what I really, really want to do. So that's one of the things I've been thinking about lately. Another thing I've really been thinking about um, is sort of how things have changed in these few years, both with in terms of the music industry, but also in terms of since COVID and um, certainly since George Floyd and some other things. So when I arrived in New York in '97, police brutality was rampant. There was the Abner Louima assault. There was the Amadou Diallo killing. There was this terrible relationship with community policing, black and brown residents. It was at an all-time high, if you can believe it. Um, so I have a background in psychology and organizational behavior, which I used to teach at one of the colleges where I worked. And myself and Gail Boyd, who also has a background in the juvenile justice system, were hired as diversity and inclusion trainers to the NYPD. We worked with cops and supervisors at almost every precinct in New York, from the Bronx to Queens to Brooklyn to Manhattan, every one of them. And what I can say is that today's protest shows that very little has changed. The culture seems to be about the same now as it was then, which was assume guilt as a means of self protection from the cop's perspective. From the resident's perspective, don't trust the cops. So here we are, however many years later, 20 some years later, and we're in the same kind of situation where there's a lack of trust. There is a great need for people to connect. There is the sort of forced distancing that we have, not just in terms of social distancing, but I think also just in terms of how we communicate with each other. So I think, one of the challenges now is how do we utilize our skills and our knowledge when it may seem unrelated to what's happening? And I think for me, I have to consider what my priorities are. Like most of you, I'm sure you guys have thought about this. How does this make us different? What do we want to do differently? What do we want to keep the same? What do we want to really discover? What do we want to learn? How do we want to go forward? So, 4 years ago, Gail Boyd and I had this idea to develop new territory for helping artists. We see more than ever that long term representation is a need that managers alone can't fulfill because management, full time management, is all consuming work. And yet, there's so many artists who need the help of a manager, can't afford one, may not need it full time, but definitely need access to the resources, to the skills, to the experience, to the knowledge that we have. So we founded our company, Vanguard Arts, as a management consulting and development firm for both individuals as well as corporations. So we provide short term consulting to self-managed artists, those of you who don't have a formal manager, and we help you with goal setting, visualization, planning, recording, production oversight, resource development, performance coaching. We sort of run the gamut, and it's all customized according to what you need at that time. So it can be in parcels because sometimes you can only focus on the next 3 months instead of the next year. Sometimes you want to have a 5-year plan, and we can help you with that. Sometimes you just want to know how to write a bio, how to put together an EPK, or what are the best ways in which to approach a venue to get booked? How do you put together a band? How do you develop a database? So we can help you with those kinds of things. And then for corporations, we provide leadership skills, cultural adaptations, communication training using art strategies. The other thing I've been spending my time with, which is really exciting, is I've been getting more and more involved with NAPAMA. And we're now doing an artist survey, which I'd like your help with, to try to assess what your concerns are and what your needs are for reopening from COVID-19. Oftentimes, these conversations, whether it's with venues or agents and managers, it's really been from the perspective of the audience or from the venue. And I think it's important that we know what you guys want. What do you need to make you feel safe, to make you feel comfortable about traveling? What do you need on stage? What do you need in the process of getting from your home to the stage, whether it's by ground or whether it's by air? What do you need? What are your main concerns? So I'd like to know what that is. Please DM me or send me an email at knkennedy@mac.com. Either way, but let's sort of focus on that. And if you can do that in the next few days, that would be great. So let's open it up for some questions. Let me see what you guys have to say. For this, I have to put on my glasses and let me know what you'd like to ask me. Okay, so Pat Harris, thank you so much. So did you ever feel like you made any headway with those cops back then? Yes. Quick quick answer is yes. Long answer is no, because we are still there. But the quick answer is yes, because okay, let's face it, in an hour, 2 hour session with 30 cops who are there with other 30 cops on their own time, they come in with the attitude of, okay, what's it to you, asshole? Basically. And we have to come in with the attitude of, let us tell you something you may not know, or let us see if you can look at it from a different point of view. So that when you encounter some 15-year-old kid who sees you and starts running, the first response may not be, he's guilty of something. It may be, he is scared of me. So we had those basic conversations. And there were times when people actually did get a sense that they could look at something differently. But there are also the what's it to your asshole kind of attitudes like, I know best and I don't really care what you have to say. And those people are still employed. So we got to figure out a different way because clearly that didn't work. Okay, what else? Thank you so much, Marvin Sparks, for joining in. It's been too long to that we've talked, and it's great. You have contributed so much to this music and to the training and the education of so many musicians. Marvin Sparks is somebody to herald. Michelle Walker, also thank you for tuning in. And of course, Jean Pierre, all the way, Jean Pierre Leduc, my dear, dear, dear friend, brother from another mother, friend from Canada, thanks. And Tierney Sutton, who, if you guys want to understand what it takes to be a collective, a true collective, a cooperative as a band, you need to talk to Tierney. She is, her whole business model has been one of inclusivity. So her band has an equal share in everything that they do. They make decisions as a band. They earn money as a band. It's not leader musician, leader side musicians, it is band. So it's a great it's really just a great model. It's one that's worked very well for her and brought her much success. So when you're thinking in these days, because we have so much time to think about different models and which one might work best for you. And Steve Kroon, one of my favorite percussionists. Thanks for calling in. Okay, any questions? Okay, here's one, Gary Armstrong, my dear friend who is going to be doing a session in the coming weeks on artist development, excuse me, on audience development. So please tune in with him, for him. He comes at this as a huge fan of the music and one of the best. I always go to him for all my big marketing questions. He was the CMO, the Chief Marketing Officer at Wonder Communications for many years, which worked at Vanity Fair, was at Rolling Stone. So anyway, tune in to Gary Armstrong. So Gary says, for years, the goal of artists was to be signed to a major label. What do you think is a smarter career goal for artists today? Established musicians as well as up and comers. So that's a great question, Gary, and a timely one. For most of you, I'm sure, who are listening, either you have wanted to record an album, have released your own album. Very few have actually been signed to a label. Why? Because there are what, three labels. Um, and I'm being a bit facetious, but not too. Here's my feeling: you have to know who your audience is. You have to know what your music is. You have to know what your capabilities are outside of being a musician. If you're going to self-release, you have to wear a lot of hats. Even when you farm some of the responsibilities out, you still are, as I used to say, you are the president of me, right? So you have to, if you're going to self-release, you have to understand, do you need a radio promotions person? Is radio valid for your music? It may not be. So why spend the money? Do you need someone to assist with social media? Even if you're on Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and Insta all day long, do you have the time to spend doing that and really not just keep maintaining your presence, but upping your presence? Do you understand sales? Do you have access to distribution? Is this going to be something that, as Pat Harris was talking about yesterday, CD baby, or is it going to be something that you're going to try to get your own individual distribution? How are you going to record it? How are you going to promote it? How are you going to distribute it? All these things have to be considered when you're self-releasing. Even if you do something through Artist Share or Kickstarter or any of this stuff, you still have to get the product into people's hands. If it's going to be all digital, if you're going to press up vinyl, if you're going to have CDs, all of that is determined by your style of music, as well as how well do you know yourself? Where do you fit? And that's really key to understand what your brand is, to understand why you're doing this, and ask yourself that hard question: is it important for people to hear? Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes it's for your own ears and your parents and your cousins and your loved ones. Sometimes you have to wait on it. We're getting ready to release, well, let me say that again. Um, So Gretchen Parlato, one of my clients, recorded an album maybe 2 years ago. We're going to release it next year. We've sat on it. We have thought about doing something where we would go to a label, but we decided we're going to go to a very small label and we're going to sit on it and release it when the time is right. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, I think I have time for one more question because this time goes by so fast. Hey, Joe Locke, thank you. And by the way, thank you, Joe, for such a great shout out to Kenny Barron's birthday the other day. It was wonderful. Okay, Marvin Sparks, how are we going to come back? Venues, artists, and how long will it take? Well, sometimes I'd like to be God, but I'm not. So I can't answer that directly, but I can say that it's going to take a long time to figure out the safest way for artists to appear in venues in front of an audience. In the meanwhile, we have to be flexible and try and figure out what works and what doesn't work. So clearly, streaming, which Pat Harris talked about to a great extent yesterday. If you didn't see it, please go on to Alternative Venues for Jazz and look up her session because she gives a lot of good information about streaming. So there is streaming. There are, of course, the house performances. But I think we also have to be creative about how we communicate, how we express our art. Sometimes it's not through strict performance. Sometimes it is through teaching and maybe teaching in a different way than what we've done before. So, short answer is I don't know. Second answer is I hope soon. And third answer is let's try to work on it and people send in some ideas. Okay, so this is going to be the end of it, and we're going to I'm going to look at your questions and I will try to answer them offline. Thanks a lot for attending, and you guys have a great day. Take care.